My name is Hal. For those on the inside, know me as Spicy. I was arrested in April 1988, second-degree murder. Convicted of second-degree murder. I was sentenced to 15 years to life. I served a little over 22 years, and I grew up in the streets of Oakland, California. Single-parent home, mom, grandma. And the street influence took over more so than the guidance from my mom and my grandmother, which ultimately led to me getting into the drug scene and the street scene, and where I ended up in prison. On April 20th, 1988, I was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstance clause. It really didn't seem real to me, the reality of what really happened. And I was sitting in the room with the investigators, and they were questioning me about specifics of the crime, so on and so forth. And I was really not wanting to hear it, but the reality started to set in that someone died as a result of my actions. I knew from that point that my life would never be what it was. It hasn't been since that day. In June of 1991, I was sentenced to second-degree murder with the possibility of parole. At that time, I was told that if I did my time well, I will be eligible and can possibly get out after, maybe 11 years or so. I was sent to Pelican Bay State Prison, my first trip, and that was an eye-opener, big time. I was what you would call in the big leagues with the big boys. And it was the ultimate reality check for me, for me to really realize what I had done. And for me, I had to learn how to live all over again in a society that I had no knowledge of prior to. I was at Pelican Bay for 2 years. In that 2 years, I saw death, I saw assaults, there was many different lockdowns. The environment was very, very, very tense at all times, whereas you had the state of mind, it's either them or me, whoever, the factions we were warring with or whatever. But me, I was young, and I felt at the time that I probably would never make it out. It's not that I would go out and look for issues or problems, but I wasn't going to back down. If we'd be on lockdown a majority of the time, and when they did allow us some yard, I was going outside knowing the chances of something happening were probably likely, and if I was to get caught up in it, then oh well, it was what it was, because that's the way it was. After 2 years, and I went to Solano State Prison Level 3, whereas coming from Pelican Bay, I was put on closed B custody, whereas my day ended at 4 o'clock, whereas the people who wasn't on closed B, they still had night activities, and I was on closed B for approximately 2 years, because they told me I was one step away from being in the chute, especially coming from Pelican Bay. So they gave me time to really rethink a lot of things and to set the path and take on a different belief system that I could get out of prison in comparison to when I was at Pelican Bay. During my first 2 years at Solano, being on closed B custody, I had a different outlook. I gained a different outlook and took on a belief system that I could make it out of prison. But I didn't understand what I needed to do wholeheartedly, because it seemed like at that time no one was getting out anyway. So it really didn't matter what you did or didn't do. But I had to, do the things that would ultimately lead to me being right here talking to you today. Well, the first 10 years I was in prison, it was very strict. There was really no lifers getting parole dates and being released. And the attitude was like, whatever, it didn't matter. You could do the programs, or you didn't have to do the programs, because in the end, no one was going home. But in the last 10 years, I'd say really in the last 8 years of my sentence, that started to change. Lifers started getting dates. Lifers started going home. That really motivated me to step mine up and involve myself in the things that would please the board and the governor's office for me to be released. And it was a domino effect, not only, for me, but many other lifers to, as you say, get connected to the things that would ultimately lead to being on this side of the fence. On my 7th board hearing, where I was found suitable, it was approved by the board commissioners. The governor's office took exactly 5 months, and they reversed that finding of suitability, which meant that it turned into a 1-year denial. I would have to go back to the board in 7 months. But having that hope that you could possibly get out and then it not happen is an ultimate slap in the face. Was I mad about it? No, because I had to accept all the possibilities of what could happen. I was, content that at least I did get found suitable. And at least I knew that I was on the right track. I think the hardest thing in that is when your family, who really doesn't understand how the system works, and when you tell them, I may be coming home, that's what they expect. And when you tell them, I'm not coming home, they can't understand that because they don't know how the system works. And I think that's the hardest thing, or was the hardest thing for me, is explaining that to my family and to try to get them to understand everything. So, yeah. 7 months after my first reversal, I went back to the board again and once again found suitable. This was in 2008. The same process happened also in 2009. I went to the board, was found suitable. But the difference from my first suitability hearing and the one in 2008 and 2009 is that I filed a writ of habeas corpus challenging the governor's findings to reverse those decisions. There was no facts to support the things that he was saying, far as why I should still be detained in custody. On my 2009 writ, on the first level, the Superior Court judge agreed with me that I had rehabilitated myself, that the governor's findings were not supported by any evidence, and he ordered me released. And that was the best feeling one could ever get, being called for legal mail. And as a matter of fact, there was a 20-page order as to why I should be released. And it was, bittersweet. It was bittersweet, because I had I could take on life on a whole new level, but then I was leaving a lot of good men behind that I so much wanted to take with me, But hey, everybody has their own journey, and mine in that place had came to an end. On August 11th, 2010, I was released from prison. Days prior to that was real antsy. It was real emotional. I had gave a majority of my stuff away. I still had stuff to give away because I wanted to be sure that I was leaving that morning. They called my name, Hayden, report to R&R, and I thought my heart was going to jump out of my chest because it really was happening. It really was happening. I said my last goodbyes to a few of the fellas. I grabbed a few of my little personal belongings that far as paperwork and stuff that I knew I would need, and I headed to R&R. Walking around the track towards R&R, I stopped and I looked back at the building. I looked at the yard, and I still see that picture in my head right now because I told myself, never again will I be a part of this type of environment. Going through the gates at R&R and sitting inside of the holding tank, it was, it was like a dream to some degree because they're processing people for release. I was called in by the watch commander to verify who I was and, to make sure that the right person was being released. I was picked up by not one but two parole officers. And they were out front waiting. I was escorted to their car, and they had to do one more stop at the main tower to verify that, you know, I was who I was. Driving through those gates, leaving prison, I could have screamed. I could have screamed, but I didn't. I kept my composure. I didn't want the people to think, the parole officers think I was really crazy. But anyway, turning on the freeway in those newer cars, I thought my stomach was going to come through my throat because they mashed it. And looking at the buildings, looking at the prison slowly fade away in the background, it really verified what I was saying earlier, never again. But now I had a whole new set of circumstances to deal with, and it was life. When the parole officers, when we left the prison, I was taken to the parole office for processing as far as the residence where I'd be staying. Now, I mentioned earlier that it was bittersweet finding out I was going home. The reasons why that was because I was originally supposed to parole to my uncle's house in Elk Grove. He passed away less than 2 weeks before I had actually gotten out. The parole board requires you to have, you know, not just one place of residence that you can go to. I was approved and accepted by reentry, a transitional environment, and and that ultimately was where I ended up. The parole officer thought I was going to Elk Grove, and when I told him my uncle had passed away, he was like, well, you know, where's your contingency plan? So I pulled out the paperwork that I had been accepted into reentry, showed it to him. He made a few phone calls, and not long after that, he says, come on, let's go. You know, I'm taking you to North Highlands. I'm like, okay. And I had the honor and the privilege to meet Mr. Tommy Hall, who's accepted me into his house, who has been a support to me from that time to this point, to this day. I've learned a lot from him. And the most important thing for me being in that house is helping him to help others who have came out after me. Yeah, I also want to give a shout out to all the people who were instrumental in my successes, family, friends.
That's how we keep it in hustle, rockin' Konnected Clothing. Kick the door open, they trying to shut it on me. Where's a businessman that could put your money on me? And we can double up, yeah, I'm talking legally. Sit down and have a meeting with me and 2 shots of Hennessy. You plan on playing me? You better play it cautious. Try to play with our profits and we invade your office.